Yes. Well, I think where we started from would be the best thing. The conference that you just mentioned in Vienna. If I could trouble you sort of to tell the story again, so I'll have it on the tape.
All right. Before I tell you about that, I would like to begin by telling you of my first learning about displaced persons from General Collins. General Harry J. Collins was the division commander of the 42nd Infantry Division, known as the Rainbow Division. When the war ended, we were in Pauling, which is a little town east of Munich. From there we were transferred to Kitzbühel in Austria. We stayed there a short time, and if memory serves me correctly, it was early in September that the division was ordered to Salzburg to relieve the 3rd Division, which had been there previously. Part of the 42nd Division was sent on to serve in Vienna, but most of it stayed in the Salzburg area and the portion south of it. I believe it was the same day that I arrived in Salzburg, or maybe a day or so later, that General Collins summoned me to his headquarters. I was the assistant division chaplain of the 42nd Infantry Division, and General Collins had also asked the division surgeon to be there, who happened to be a Jew, and the surgeon of special troops, who was a Jew, who was also the general's personal physician. The general told us that he had just come back from seeing a displaced persons camp in which many, if not most, of the inmates were Jews. He said that he had never seen such conditions, such filth, people living in such squalor. He told me that, or he told us rather, that he had many Jewish friends in America, and he had been in their homes, and he knew that Jews didn't live like this by choice. And he told us to go down to the camp and find out why these conditions prevailed there, what the people needed to correct these conditions. We went down there immediately, and we drew up a list of things we felt were needed to clean up the camp and to make it comparatively livable, or as livable as a camp like that could be. This camp had been apparently an army barracks, and not a very good one before this.
This was in Salzburg, actually?
Yes, in Salzburg.
Was that the Franz Josef Kaserne, the old...
It may have been that. I don't remember the name of it now. We came back with a list to the general, who called in his G4, that's the supply officer, and ordered him to get the necessary things. When the supply officer said, "Where shall I get them?" the general merely said, "Get them." And the officer went ahead and got them. Later on, when we came back and we said they need recreational facilities, that they need a piano, for example, the general ordered that a piano be gotten by the Burgermeister of Salzburg so that the Jews would have these recreational facilities. Now, to come to one of the most important of my memories as far as the officials of the army was concerned, not long after we were in Salzburg, the general summoned me and all the officers of division headquarters who had anything to do with displaced persons. This included the Red Cross officer, the supply officer, the medical officer, the officer in charge of recreation, and so on. He told us that General Mark Clark, who was commanding general for the American troops in Austria, had summoned us for a meeting the following morning, and that we would drive all night to Vienna. On the way, the general stopped his car and one by one took the officers into his car to brief him on every possible aspect of the DP work as it pertained to Jews. In the morning, in Vienna, we met in the headquarters of the Rothschild Bank. There we discovered that the general had relieved, that is, that General Mark Clark had relieved the general in charge of the division which was occupying the Linz area, had relieved him of his command because of the poor conditions existing in the Jewish DP camps there. A protest parade of Jews had taken place in Linz, which had been publicized in the New York papers, and Mark Clark was very disturbed at this. When we assembled at the meeting, and were all present, Mark Clark came into the room. We all stood to attention, of course. He asked us to sit down, told us that he was sorry he had made his travel all night. But then this pleasant manner changed, and he said that the reason he had called us together was that his orders to his subordinates with reference to the treatment of Jews had not been carried out, that he had explicitly ordered the generals to give special attention to the Jews who had suffered so much during the Nazi regime. And he said, "I think I know why you have not obeyed my orders. It is because you are not in sympathy with these orders." He then went on to shout, "I don't give a goddamn whether you're interested or in sympathy with my orders on the Jews or not. You will obey them." He then proceeded to ask each general in turn questions concerning the Jews in their areas. Most of the generals could not even tell him how many camps contained Jews or how many Jews there were in his area. General Collins, on the other hand, was completely conversant with all the facts because he had been briefed, and also because, and I say this in all sincerity, because he was really interested in the plight of the Jews, as he had shown many times. In one case, a question was asked of General Collins, not a very important question. He did not know the answer, and he said to Mark Clark, "I have brought my chaplain with me. He can answer this question," whereupon I answered it. It was as a result of this meeting that Mark Clark decided to open up a new displaced persons camp in Bad Gastein.
That was the result of that particular meeting.
Right. And most of the Jews who originally came to Bad Gastein came from the Linz area. The advantage of the Bad Gastein situation was that there were many empty hotels, whereas before this the Jews had lived in shacks and at best in former army barracks. They were now placed in hotels. This is not to say that they lived luxuriously in the hotels. Rooms that had formerly been occupied by one person or a couple were now occupied by 10 or 12 people, dormitory style. However, it was now possible to have couples live in privacy in small individual rooms. This that I've mentioned, the establishment of the camp in Bad Gastein was probably the outstanding practical result of the meeting. However, I believe it had very important results that were not immediately evident, in that the generals and the other officers understood that Mark Clark was very much interested in what was happening with the Jews, and as a result of this, the conditions throughout Austria improved immeasurably, as I was able to see.
Well, there's one point here. You see, as I didn't know exactly what you could tell me, I hadn't prepared a sequence of questions. But just joining up with this last point, there were different reports about General Mark Clark. There was one report, for instance, that he had been very strict in some cases concerning Jews. He didn't want them to stay in Austria. He wanted to move them on. And whenever Jews arrived, he would insist that there could be only that many Jews in Austria and not more than that. That doesn't prove anything. I'm just saying that there were different reports about him.
It might well be that this was in order to move them on so that they might be able to go on to ultimately to what was then Palestine. I don't know. Undoubtedly, the displaced persons, from a strictly army point of view, created many problems of administration and so on.
The Anglo-American subcommission.
Yes, the Anglo-American Commission was traveling through the displaced persons areas, investigating the situation there, and later to make their report. And as I recall, the three members of the commission who came through the Austrian area, or at least through the area of the 42nd Division, were Major Reginald Manningham Buller, who was later the Attorney General of Great Britain, and later is now, I believe, the Lord Chancellor.
Yes.
A Mr. Crick, who was a banker, and the American member, his name escapes me now, but he was the editor of the Boston Herald. You could easily find out his name. And when the Jews in Bad Gastein heard that they were going to come down to visit Bad Gastein, they made plans to organize a protest parade. Word was brought to the general somehow about this, I believe by the captain in charge down there, who happened to be a very fine young Jewish man, very sympathetic to the Jewish displaced persons. The general called me and told me to go down to Bad Gastein to tell the Jews there that they must not parade, that it was an order from General Eisenhower that there be no so-called illegal assemblies. An illegal assembly was one that would cast aspersions, for example, on one of the allies of America. And it was quite apparent that at this time any protest parades would be directed against the British. And General Collins told me that he had no choice in this matter but to forbid the parade to take place. This was not his decision, this was a decision of higher headquarters. I tried to convince General Collins that Bad Gastein was in a far-off spot, that to the best of my knowledge there were no newspaper reporters there, and that if a parade were permitted to take place, no one would know the difference, that the captain down there could keep order, and that nothing would happen. However, if he refused to permit it, and if the Jews insisted that they would, and I was sure that they would insist, because their mood at that time was such, because the British were then turning back the ships, the refugee ships. I felt certain that under those circumstances there might be bloodshed, or at least the Jews would battle the soldiers, and there might then be publicity which would be adverse to the American army. The general thought for a moment and told me that he wished he could accept my suggestion, but what I was telling him was that he should turn over his responsibility as a general to a captain, and this he could not do. And he ordered me to go down and tell the Jews there that they were not to parade, and to read to them General Eisenhower's order. Included in this order was a statement that the punishment for disobeying this order could be the death penalty. I went down and called the leaders of the Bad Gastein group together. I told them what the general had told me. I told them that by order of the general I had to read this order of General Eisenhower to them, which I did. They did not obey the order. They did hold this protest parade, and it was only through the grace of God that there was no violence, because as army vehicles went through the town on their assigned duties, the parade refused to move, and in a few instances I witnessed incidents that might have been very serious, but fortunately did not turn out as serious as they might have been. Later the general called me in and asked me to express his great disappointment that his order had been disobeyed. He told me that he had been greatly embarrassed in that the members of the commission realized that this group of Jews was not obeying his orders. He felt that he had been very understanding of the Jews throughout, and he had felt that this was a courtesy that they ought to extend to him, and he was sorely disappointed that they had not done so. I must say to the credit of General Collins that he did not let this incident turn him against the Jews. One of the things that happened shortly before I left on April 1st was that a delegation of the very religious Jews came to me and said that they must have a mill and some flour since Pesach was coming, and they wanted to bake matzahs. I told them that the Joint Distribution Committee was importing matzahs, and there would be plenty of matzahs without the need to bake them. They answered that they would not eat these machine-made matzahs in America, that they must have their own. I felt that this was a request which it would be very difficult to make of the general, because of the precarious situation of the Austrians and their own economy. However, the message was given to the general, and frankly, to my great surprise, he took over an Austrian mill and procured the flour, and matzahs were baked there for the Jews of the Salzburg area in Bad Gastein.
Right, well, I think סוף עדותו של הרב אילי בוהנן, היאניס, קייפ קוד, מסצ'וסטס, 12 באוגוסט 1962.
ירושלים, ה-25 לאפריל 1965, ראיון עם הרב דוקטור רבי בוהנן, המראיין אהרון קידר. אז דבר ראשון, אני שמח מאוד שניתנה לנו אפשרות להיפגש ולהשלים את מה שלא הספקת בעדות הקודמת. אני לא אשאל אותך שאלות, אולי באמת תספר את אותם הדברים שאז מסיבות ידועות לא היית כל כך חופשי או לא כל כך רצית לספר אותם.
Well, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to speak to you on this matter. I am answering you in English, even though your question comes to me in Hebrew, not because I don't speak Hebrew, but my Hebrew is not perfect yet, and I wouldn't want to record my mistakes for posterity and for history, so I will speak to you in English. When I met with Dr. Bauer in our summer home in Cape Cod, I was not able to transmit to him one very important fact. At least I believe it is important in order to have the record complete. And the reason for it was that it involved my General Harry Collins, the commanding general of the 42nd Infantry Division, who had been in every instance in which I had any relationship with him a friend of the Jews. I don't remember whether I mentioned the fact that whenever I had to go to the general to discuss with him the welfare of a soldier, an American soldier, I could not go directly to him. I always had to go to the Chief of Staff first and ask permission. But the general told me that if I was coming to him with a matter relating to the displaced persons, to the Jewish displaced persons, I need not go through the Chief of Staff. I could come directly to him. And this was something that was almost unknown in the division, that an officer, my rank was only that of major, that I could bypass the Chief of Staff and go directly to him. I had to walk through the Chief of Staff's office to do this, and the chief, it seemed to me, sometimes looked at me somewhat in anger that I had things to tell the general which were not for his ears. I mention this just so that we may understand how the general felt about the problem of the Jewish displaced persons. The matter which I want to bring to the attention of Dr. Bauer is this, that one day, I believe it was either in December of 1945 or in January of 1946, I regret that I cannot be certain of the dates, the general's headquarters staff was called together, and in addition to his staff were officers who were engaged in the daily routine of handling matters involving displaced persons, particularly Jewish displaced persons. And the general told us that an order had been received from a higher headquarters, he would not specify which headquarters, that from now on, until further notice, it was to be one of the tasks of the division to facilitate the movement of Jews across our division territory, whereas up until this time there were occasions when we had been ordered not to permit any movement of displaced persons, of Jewish displaced persons across the division territory. From now on until further notice, we were to help them in their movement across Austria. He said that this order would never be put in writing, that if any reference were ever made to it, it would be denied,
and that anyone who mentioned it would be called a liar. Now I realize that I am putting myself in this position. I did not want to make this public before because General Collins was still alive. Unfortunately, he has since passed away, and I feel that it is important for the sake of his memory as well as for the sake of the historical facts that this be made known in some way so that the position of the American Army and specifically the 42nd Division be made clear with reference to the movement of displaced persons. And while this was an order which came to the general from higher headquarters, I can tell you from my own day-by-day experience that General Collins took advantage of every opportunity he could within the framework of the orders by which he had to operate to help the Jews. I believe I can say without any danger of contradiction that the situation of the Jews in the area under the jurisdiction of the 42nd Division was better than that of anywhere else in Europe. I know this because many chaplains have told me that they had to do whatever they could to help the Jews secretly without anyone knowing, whereas I was always encouraged by my general to do what I could to help the Jews.
According to your opinion, why they hidden this order?
I am convinced it was because we still had to maintain friendly relations with our allies, particularly with the British, and it would have been a serious thing, I believe, for the British to know that an order existed which was helping Jews to move across Austria with the knowledge that they would try to get into Israel, then Palestine, at a time when the British were doing everything they could to prevent it.
How many men heard this order?
I would say that there were between 15 and 20 men present.
עכשיו דוקטור בוהנן, אולי שאלה נוספת. אולי תמסור לנו חוות דעת כללית לגבי יחס השלטונות הצבאיים לשאלת העקורים, ובאיזו מידה כל גנרל קבע בעצמו את המדיניות.
I think that I can best answer your question by saying that there were rather general orders given to each division as to its care of the Jews. These orders came from General Clark directly, and he probably got his from a higher headquarters. However, these orders must have been rather general, or at least the commanding officers thought they were, because I was able to see that whereas in the Linz area, under the command of a different general, Jews were treated almost like prisoners in their camps. In the area of the 42nd Division where I was, the general felt that it was his responsibility to see to it that the Jewish displaced persons were given as many opportunities to live decently as were available in the difficult situation which existed immediately after the war. I know that at a time when the Jews in Linz, as I say, were treated as if they were a nuisance. General Collins called me in together with the commanding officer of the medical battalion, who was a Jew, and his own personal physician, an army officer who was a Jew, and told us that he wanted us to go to the displaced persons camp. This was the first day we arrived in Salzburg, to find out what was needed to help the Jews there, because their conditions, the conditions in which they were living, were so horrible. And this was under the command of the American division, which we relieved. In other words, they left. They were the 3rd Division, and we were the 42nd Division. And apparently General Collins was horrified at the conditions which he saw existing when he came there. It seems that the general who was there before was not so concerned. And when we went and we saw what was needed, we drew up a long list. The general called in his G4, that is the supply officer, and gave him the list. And this officer looked at the list and almost fainted, and he said, "General, where am I going to get these things?" And the general looked at him sternly and said, "Get them." And of course the G4 then saluted and said, "Yes, sir." I remember we wanted a piano for the camp. The general immediately called the Burgomaster of Salzburg and said, "Send over a piano, even if you have to take it from someone's home, to the Jewish camp." He understood that they needed recreation and too an opportunity for some kind of entertainment. And the general was very understanding of many of the problems there, which I found were not so understandable to some of his lower officers. I don't remember whether in my original dictation, when I spoke to Dr. Bauer, whether I referred to the meeting that General Clark had with the officers of his command. Well, there was evidence that General Mark Clark was very angry with the other generals. He actually swore and said, "I don't give a goddamn whether you like my orders or not," with reference to the Jews, and whether you were sympathetic or not. But with Harry Collins, General Collins, he put his arm around him and walked privately with him to his office, because he felt... He was what?
No, if he was nervous.
No. General Clark was acting in this way to show the other generals that he was displeased with them, but he was pleased with General Collins, because General Collins was doing what Mark Clark thought they should do. Some of the other generals didn't even know how many Jews or how many camps there were for Jews, and General Collins knew, because he was interested all the time in helping them. He wanted me to report regularly to him about the situation of the Jews. I don't know whether I mentioned, we were able to set up in the camps there a kind of internal economy, so that the way it worked was this, and again, I don't remember whether I told this to Dr. Bauer. We told our Jewish soldiers, I moved around the division area every day conducting services and meeting with the soldiers, and I said to them, write home to your family to send us packages for the displaced persons. And I said, it can be candy, even lipstick for the women to keep up their morale, lipstick and powder, combs, toothbrushes, anything they want to send. And when we got those, in one day, it happened that a train with 3 freight cars came in filled with packages for the displaced persons. As a matter of fact, I remember this very well. I was summoned to the office of the Inspector General who questioned me on what these packages were for. Apparently he was afraid that I was going to use them on the black market, and he had a stenographer there, and he made me raise my hand and swear that I would tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This was an official investigation. However, when I told him that General Collins was very much interested in the plight of the displaced persons, the Jewish displaced persons, and these were going to help them, he immediately closed the investigation. And what we did with these was that we set up a whole organization. For example, we had some people whose only responsibility was to open the packages and tear off the return address. We had other people, girls, at typewriters, writing letters to thank the people who sent them and inviting them, if they could, to send us some more. We had people who then took these packages and separated the various items and into various categories. We paid people with scrip, that is with money, internal money that we made. So the people who opened the packages got paid. We had teachers teaching the children, they got paid with this scrip. The people who cleaned in the halls got paid in this way. And we were able actually to have an internal economy there based on the packages. Now these packages continued to come in because it wasn't just individual families that were sending us these, but many of the mothers of the soldiers, when they got the letters from their sons, went to their synagogues, and the sisterhood organizations, the women of the synagogue, had campaigns to send all these packages, and that is why they arrived, as I say, in tremendous numbers, and we were able to have this system both in Salzburg and in Bad Gastein, and it functioned very well because it not only gave people an opportunity to work and to keep up their morale in that way and not to be just sitting doing nothing, but it also provided them with food and even clothing. We had tailors there repairing. Some of the clothing was old clothing, and in many ways this was very good. I know that when some men like Judge Simon Rifkind came to our area, he was very much impressed with this economy that had been instituted there. Now all this was done because the general encouraged us to do whatever he could to help the Jews there. Now I don't think anything like this was known in any other area, so in a way I'm answering your question that the general was going what might be called perhaps lifnim mishurat hadin, and in other areas the generals hardly knew that the displaced persons were there. They were satisfied to let their subordinate officers take care of the whole thing.
You cooperate with chaplains from other divisions?
No, no other chaplain from any other division got into our area at all. I did visit Chaplain Klausner, who did a remarkable job in his area. He was a kind of Robin Hood, and I believe that somebody ought to write a book on his exploits there and what he did. It would make a very good story.
He was about 2 weeks ago in Israel.
I'm sorry I missed him. I would have wanted to meet him here. But I might tell you something else that would be of interest in this situation. I think this will illustrate what the feeling of subordinate officers was, because they knew how the general felt about it. We had a visit from the Anglo-American Commission. This was a subcommittee of the Anglo-American Commission. I made reference to it, I know, in my earlier report. And the American officers were very unsympathetic toward the British representatives there because of the way they were asking questions. The British representatives were, it seemed to me, trying to find out just what the position of our division was with reference to the movement of Jews. And they suspected that we were of some help to them, I think, or at least that we weren't exerting ourselves as they would have liked to stop the movement of Jews. And the kind of questions they asked indicated this. They wanted to know where they got their gasoline, for instance, for the trucks which were used. They couldn't understand how it was possible for so many Jews to be there. They visited the camp that was supervised by one of the chayalim of the Bricha, and they couldn't understand how it was possible for this movement. They knew that people didn't stay in this particular camp very long, and how they could get there without some assistance, or at least from their point of view, inefficiency on the part of our division. When we went from Salzburg to Bad Gastein, and one of the British officers, or rather representatives of the Anglo-American Commission was on board, they had a very antagonistic feeling towards him. And when I had occasion to speak sharply to him in answer to something he said to me, and he turned around and walked out of the room in anger, the American officers, who were not Jews, came over to shake my hand because they were pleased that I had told this English representative what I thought of him at the time. And I spoke to him as I did because of something he had said with reference to the Jews, which I didn't feel I should take in silence. And they appreciated the fact that I spoke back to him, and they acted as they did towards me in this instance, because they felt that he was there to spy on them and in a way to impede the things that they were doing.
Now I want to ask about General Patton. You heard about the idea that he was a quiet anti-Semitic. Is it true?
I've heard these charges. I don't really think they are true. One would have to know the general character of General Patton to understand that he probably was very unhappy over the fact that instead of being engaged in fighting and killing the enemy, he now had to be what he would regard as a babysitter for displaced persons. And he resented the fact that this was now his job. You may have heard of his visit to a hospital during the war, and he slapped an American soldier, not a Jew, an American soldier who apparently seemed to be afraid. And Patton, Patton made the famous speech about blood and guts, and the soldiers called him Blood and Guts Patton. He was a man who had no patience with any civilian activities. He didn't feel that this was part of his job, and when it became part of his job to take care of displaced persons, he didn't take it seriously. He resented it, and my feeling is that he would have acted in the same way towards any displaced persons, Yugoslavs, Poles, or Jews. And I believe that General Rose, who was one of his highest ranking officers, was a Jew. I know he was a Jew, and I don't believe that he could have been in the position that he was and had Patton had any anti-Semitic feelings towards Jews.
In the time till April 1946, you meet Jews from Palestine that their job was bricha?
Yes, mainly I met those who were in this particular transit camp in Salzburg, and the job they did was fantastic. They didn't sleep. Night and day they worked. I remember talking to one of them after he had had a particularly bad day, because the displaced persons didn't always understand the difficulties of the situation. They came there, they demanded things which the Chayalim could not give to them. They fought amongst themselves, and I remember very well one of the Chayalim saying to me, I want to do everything I can for them. They are my brothers, even though they are not acting to me like brothers. But someday their children will be wonderful, wonderful people in Israel. And whenever I become unhappy about the conduct of them, I try to think of their children who will be living in our own land someday. And because it is very difficult to appreciate for someone who wasn't actually there what the Chayalim had to go through. I know some of the things that I went through myself. I told you the story of the packages that were being sent in, and sometimes I was able to get a package to an individual person. I would write to the family of a displaced person and tell them, your nephew or your niece is here, he needs a suit. If you will send it to me, put it in a package with his name on it, and then put another wrapping around it with my name. I will remove the outside wrapping, then I will know who is to get it, and I will give it to him. It happened that someone from the, I believe it was from the Haganah, visited the camp, and he spoke to me afterwards, and he said, why are you doing these terrible things to these poor Jews? And I said, what do you mean? I must have become very red. I thought I was helping them. And he said, I am told that you take out of these packages new suits that are sent to these people, and you put in old clothes and you sell them on the black market. Well, the people, they didn't understand that their uncles were sending them old clothes, because in America you couldn't just go out and get a suit in those days. You had to have a ration ticket. You know that there was a shortage of clothes in America too, so you couldn't buy clothing freely. And I understood then why. I'm not comparing myself with Moshe Rabbeinu, but you remember when Moses also said, "At Chamor mi lakachti," apparently he was accused of stealing too. So if he was, I said,
in a good company.
I was in very good company. Yes, I've wandered from the subject, but I did answer you that my contact with the people from the Bricha was mainly these Chayalim.
They look after your aid in some subjects? They mean from Bricha?
Did they ask for my help?
Yes.
Not very often, because it really wasn't that necessary for me to help them. They had very good help in many ways from one of our own lieutenants, who is mentioned often in the books that I have read, Nowinski.
Polish.
Yes, he was an American soldier, of Polish extraction, and I used to meet with Nowinski often, and we had an understanding that we would not talk to each other too much about things that were better left unsaid, but each of us knew what the other was doing.
לפני זה סיפרת על עזרה שנתתם לעקורים, האם בתקופה הראשונה את המזון הם קיבלו גם מכם?
מכם זאת אומרת
מהצבא האמריקאי.
The American Army was able to supply some of the needs as far as food was concerned through the surplus Red Cross packages that had been intended for prisoners of war, and these were now available in somewhat limited quantities. However, the Army forced the Austrian authorities to supply food for the displaced persons, and as you probably know, every displaced person was supposed to get a certain number of calories per day from the Austrian authorities. This was supervised by the American Army. However, I found there were times when the Austrians tried to take advantage of the ignorance of some officers, particularly in outlying sections. I happened to go through along the road. I found a small camp in which there were some Jews, and it was administered by a young lieutenant, and I used my rank then to order him to show me his books and what he was feeding the people there, and I found that the Austrian authorities were sending in salt and tea and things like that with no calorie value, and they were putting alongside of it a certain number of calories. And I then pointed out to him that he had to keep better watch on them. But in the early days, the situation was very difficult, and it improved when the joint was able to bring food in, and Mr. James Rice, who was then in charge of the joint, did a wonderful job. However, the complaint with the food was not so much in terms of quantity, but in terms of the monotony of it. So often they used to say to us, please get us food, we're sick of eating calories. And we were able, through the help of my assistant, and I would like his name somewhere to get into this record. His name is Eli Heimberg. He was a corporal, and while I concentrated mainly on Bad Gastein, he concentrated on working with the Jews in Salzburg. And when the Jewish displaced persons became very, very tired of the bread they were eating, and it was this dark, heavy bread, he made a deal with the quartermaster in division headquarters. Our soldiers wanted to change too, so we were able to take the white bread from the division bakery and give it to the displaced persons in return for the black bread, which the displaced persons didn't like. And again, here was an example of cooperation. There was no problem in doing this.
רצוף לעניין הסיוע והעזרה לעקורים, מתי התחילה פעולת הג'וינט שם, ובמה התבטאה עזרתו?
If my memory serves me correctly, the Joint Distribution Committee began to function almost immediately in September, shortly after I arrived there, or about the same time. However, in the very beginning, their assistance was not to a very great extent along material lines, because they had not yet received any shipments of food themselves, but they were able to help the people in other ways, in getting them connected with families, with going to the military authorities for things that could be done for them, and so on. However, when food began to come in, they were of much more assistance along practical lines. The Joint was also of great assistance in intervening in behalf of Jews who were stopped when they were trying to move across the country. This was done constantly by representatives of the joint who worked very closely with the military authorities there, and there was a good relationship. At times the joint would ask me, when they couldn't approach military authorities, to help them in these situations.
אתה באת במגעים קרובים עם הפליטים. האם הם כולם באמת דיברו על עתידם בארץ ישראל, או שהם חשבו להמשיך למקומות אחרים?
Almost every one of them said that he wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael. However, I must add that some of them may not have been sincere about this, because the Jewish displaced persons camps were very well organized on party lines too, and there was a great deal of, shall I say, propaganda there on behalf of movement towards Israel. And those who might have wanted to go elsewhere, I think, would have been afraid publicly to say so. I know we had representatives of the UNRWA there who tried to make surveys of who wanted to go to Palestine and who wanted to go elsewhere. And even there, I think there was some hesitation on the part of people to speak freely. My impression was that the great majority wanted to go to Israel, the great majority. That a few, had they not been afraid, would have said that they wanted to go elsewhere. I've mentioned the fact that they were organized on party lines there. I remember how shocked I was one day to find that in the office in Bad Gastein of the General Zionists, there had been a raid by members of another party, and the picture of Chaim Weizmann, which had been hanging on the wall, was thrown on the ground, and the glass was broken, and the room itself was damaged, and the furniture was thrown around the room. And I remember I couldn't help saying to myself at the time, "Kan gresser daiges hat nicht," that you want to fight amongst yourselves. And I remembered, of course, the story of how when Yerushalayim was being attacked by the enemy from without, that they were fighting, the Jews were fighting amongst themselves while the enemy was right outside. And I couldn't help feeling that this was a bad thing that was going on within the camp, but I guess human nature had to prevail.
I think that it is our and we finished here, and I thank you very much.
I thank you very much for your coming to see me here, and if in the future there is anything I can add out of my knowledge, I would be very glad to try to do so. And please convey my very warm regards to Dr. Bauer. I remember so well the enjoyable time I spent with him, and I regret very greatly that it was not possible for us to meet while I was here.
Okay.